Hey, so this is part 2 of the video that I did on how to make a scorecard. And specifically in this video, we're going to look at how do you test your calculated fields and talk about the different ways you can do that. So this particular dashboard had one field called value. It was a float field, and I wanted to format it in different ways. So I use string calculations to do that. So sometimes it's a percentage, sometimes it's a whole number, sometimes one decimal. I think I have a dash and a check mark in there too. So along the bottom of my workbook, you'll notice that there's a bunch of worksheets that begin with a check. And so these are my test criteria, if you would. And I put my test description in the caption field. If you don't see the caption field on your worksheet, you can choose show caption. And then with all of these, you can click on the title area and drag it, and Tableau will display a dark line indicating where it's going to drop that caption block or filter shelf or whatever it is you're moving around. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back on top of filters. And in this particular test, I said if the format is integer, the date is March 11th. So I'm displaying my date filters here on the right. And the unique ID is 1. Now I actually have unique ID set to multiple values, but you could zero in and just do 1. But for my testing, I want to be very specific that this value should come back with a comma. So it should be 3000, comma 538. Now the field that's displaying that is called 1.1 value string. It's up here on the row shelf. So if I edit that field, I can see the logic that it's using. So for this particular field, it happens to be this chunk of code. But if you weren't sure, you can briefly change the code to something else and then see did it change in the view. So here this is a string field, I want to display Kathy instead. And I'm just going to use comments to comment out the rest of that particular line of code. And I'm going to do OK. And then you can see it actually changed in the view to Kathy. If I go back in and edit it again and take that out, then it should display, when I click on apply, it instantly goes back to the 3538. You can actually just pick a different field on the data pane on the left and choose to edit it, and it will also change. So for instance, if I wanted to change my left of value, I could just come over in the data pane, choose edit, and the calculation editor goes right to that, and it saves whatever I was on before. You can use the same thing I mentioned earlier about going into the then line and changing the result. And here, if I changed it to be Kathy, I'm going to get a really ugly warning. Let me show you. If I do apply, really, really ugly. Everything turns to red and it warns me there's a mistake. And that's because this particular calculation that I moved to returns an integer, not a string. So if I was to change that block to be 9999 or something else like that and apply it, then that's okay. Tableau can handle that and it goes back to normal. If you're not sure what this calculation returns, to the left of it, it says equals ABC if it's a string. I'm looking at left of value, and you can see that has the pound symbol indicating it's a number. So you can just look at those to decide, how should I display it. The red is very glaring and it throws you for a second, but it's just a simple change to put it back. Okay, so I wanted to show you the check mark real quick. And this particular calculation test is returning a check mark if the original value was a check mark. And right now I have original value, that field up here on the rows shelf. If it wasn't there and I'm trying to figure out, what was it? One of the things I could do is drag it and drop it onto my tooltip. And before I do that, I want to show you how the tooltip looks. Okay, so right now, if I hover over a mark, and by that I mean 00 or a blank, then it's going to display the tooltip. And I can click on the tooltip tile on the marks card, and I can edit it and say OK, and it'll change the way the tooltip looks in the view. Now, it doesn't display a tooltip if you're over a heading. So value, first PP, second PP, left of value, that column is actually coming from the measure names on the rows shelf. and that measure names would be your field names. So that's where that's coming from. So you're not going to see a tooltip when you're over headings. You're only going to see it when you're on top of the value. Now, because I custom edited the tooltip, if I was to drag original value back onto the tooltip and drop it, you can see the field, the blue field is now on that tile, but it's not in the view. And that's because it was a custom tooltip. So what I have to do is go back in and edit the tooltip and choose reset. And now it'll show up in the view. So if you're ever missing a field or something like that, or if you drag a field off the view and now the tooltip has an ugly warning, not found or something, that's how you would fix it. Okay, I want to go to round up left. This is a really interesting example. So this particular one, you can see that my value as string is 18.899999, and the original value was 18.9. And if I was to go back in and look at my original field from my Excel file that it read in, it's actually 18.9. So because it's a float, the computer is storing it as a really long number. Now, I want to look at the left of value and say, why is it rounding it, or why is it displaying 9999? So I need to go into that field. And I was testing, and I commented out the 9999, what was there originally. So I'm going to remove that. That was just a comment while I was testing. And I'm going to choose apply. And now you can see that the left of value is 19. And the reason is that this chunk of code here is rounding that up. If the second precision point was a 9, it'll actually round up the left if the left was greater than 8. And so that's the logic that you see here. It's rounding up based on those two values. Now, you might be wondering, why is the second PP a 9? Because that's not, I'm looking at it right here, it's a 0.90, so I would have expected the second precision point or decimal should have been a 0. But floats are stored in computers by really long digits, so it would be something like 0.999999. So if you want to see what is the original value, not the one that I've changed in these fields here, I've actually acted on the values, so that's what you're seeing here. You could make a field simply to display the original value. And so I have one up here called second PP percent of value, and you can tell that I'm displaying a really long, actually that's not the right one, I take that back. I want to look at second PP from original value. And I'm using left to grab that chunk of code. I'm saying keep 20 characters of it and convert all that into an integer and show it to me. So if I want to see this on my view, I simply drag that number down to my measure values shelf and drop it. And I'm going to just change it to an attribute. And you can see here it's 20 decimals of 999999. So computers think it's 99999, not a 0. But that's because it was stored as a float. So you might want to make test fields so that you can see what is the value before I manipulate it in my code or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off for now. And then I wanted to look at the next one is check percent. And so this is test 4. And I wanted to round it up if needed. And it should be a 1 decimal percentage. So I'm also going to add in the percentage symbol on the right. And it's the last chunk here for unique ID 5. That's the one I wanted to look at and see. And the value is in the June 3rd column. So it's these numbers that are deciding how is that going to be displayed. So the original number was a float that was 0.517. The left of that, once I convert it to a percentage, would be 51. So this left of value right here, that's the field that I'm looking at. And if I choose left of percent of value in my data pane and edit it, you can see here I'm just rounding it up with times 100. So that's converting it into a percentage, appearance of a percentage. And then I'm doing logic to say, does it need rounded up? If it's a positive, add a 1. If it's a negative, subtract a 1. If it doesn't need rounded up, just return the left value, whatever it was. But the interesting thing here is by displaying the numbers, I can see, should it have rounded it up? So my second precision point here is a 1, and that's probably because if I was to go 8 or 9 decimals to the right, again, it's a float, so it was probably something like 51.708999 or something. So it's rounding it up again properly. I wanted it to drop the 0 and only keep the 1 decimal, so I'm keeping the left plus the first precision point, and then I'm going to add a percentage at the end. So let me show you that. I'm going to edit the field 1.1 value as string, and at this point I want the code that says if the format is a %. And then you can see here I'm keeping the first precision point as a %, meaning I rounded it or multiplied it by 100. So that's where that one is coming from. Now my next one is check the roundup left. And it's very similar to the left that we just looked at, but the difference is that this was in fact a percentage, and so I'm going to be rounding up the percentage after I've done times 100, then I round up the left. And you can see up here in the title area, whoops, sorry. If I double click in the title area, you can see how I edited that. I actually just added the field in the title so that at a glance I can see, what should it be? It's working as expected. And then I do also have that second PP from original value here. The float is really a bunch of 9s decimals. And let's see. The roundup left is similar here. I'm giving you the coding and explaining that it's rounding it up again for me. I have roundup first precision point. This test is looking at the first PP and is it rounding up properly? I have a little blue check mark here for you. And I'm saying if it's a 2, that would be expected based on the fact that the original precision point was a 1. And then the second precision point was an 8, so I would expect the 1 to get rounded up. And then I'm only keeping 1 decimal in my final outcome, which here is 50.2%. And then the next test is whether or not it was a null. This is something that my users wanted, that if the value was a null, which when you convert a float to a string, if it's a 0, you end up with a null. They want to put it back to be a 0. And you can see here that for a 1 decimal, they wanted it to display as 0.0. And then the last test is if it's a percentage in a null, I would like it to be a dash. And so again, that was just testing the code. If it came across as 0, I want you to change it to be a dash. So I think that's everything. I hope it was helpful for you to see how you might go about testing. A lot of times I make these worksheets and I hide them like on one big fat dashboard or something, or I'll show them to my users and surprisingly they'll say leave it in there. And then in the future I can double check that it's still working properly, or if you do an upgrade on your workbook and you want to quickly revalidate everything's working as expected, it's kind of handy to have those around. So that's the end of part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.